welcome to The Wedding Edit, a wedding planning podcast for the modern couple. We are your hosts, Kelly and Dana. Today we are going to talk about the dreaded word, COVID. But today's episode we have dedicated to how COVID has impacted weddings over the last couple of years. We didn't want to talk about it in every episode, so we've dedicated one episode to talk about it to help those couples who may be faced with some of these challenges. And we have the lovely Anna and Jacob here today who got married in January 2022, so just recently. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So we would love to know a little bit about you guys. Tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you met and your love story. We'd love to hear all about it.
Sure. Well, I'll start.
Sure.
And then I'll hand over to you if you want. So we actually met in a singing group shortly after high school. So we are both singers and musos in our former lives and current lives. But we both went to two different schools, both east of Adelaide, and it was really funny that we had never met before. So considering that we did pretty much the same things just at different schools, we'd never come across each other before. So we met when we were, straight out of high school. The particular music teacher that we both had at separate schools created this group for all of her students that were of a similar age to us, and brought us all together. So
awesome.
a nice little mash of all these different people. And when I first met Jacob, I thought he was a bit of a nerd. Not much.
True.
I mean, that hasn't changed. But I thought he was ridiculously talented musician. But he was really shy. So we didn't actually start dating until 3 years later. So formed a really nice friendship first with everyone in the group. And then we realised, a little bit later on, there was something a little bit more there.
Oh, that's really sweet.
That is so
Such
sweet.
a nice way to meet.
Yeah.
So what do you actually you talked about that you play an instrument. What instrument is it that you play? And do you both play an instrument, or are you just a singer? Well, not just a singer, but that's a very
Singer's
awesome
so
thing to do.
important.
Yeah.
Both singers. I play guitar as well. So I did a bit of that when I was at uni, playing in pubs, weddings,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was my job. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was good fun.
Oh, that would have been so much fun.
And yes, I am just a singer. When I was at school, I did a bit of everything: piano, violin, viola, played the bagpipes. I went to a Scottish
that's
school.
amazing.
So,
Yeah.
but singing was something I had done, and it was something that I wanted to keep doing.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a nice outlet as well. So I was really neither of us were going to do music at university, which was sort of like the obvious path. If you are musically inclined at school, you might consider doing music at uni. But neither of us were. So, when this group sort of came up, it was a great way to keep at least one part of both of our musical backgrounds alive. But, Jacob's definitely the stronger muso between the two of us. He can also write a lot of music as well. So he hides that one
amazing.
away.
That's so
you're
good.
not,
Bits and pieces.
you're not teaching music. You're
No, I'm not. I help out with
Yeah.
the school musical.
sorry. I should go back a step and say
Yeah.
Jacob's a
before
teacher.
we jumped on the podcast, we did ask Anna and Jacob what they did for work. If you guys wanted to,
So I work in marketing.
And I'm a teacher, English teacher.
Yeah,
For high school.
yeah.
Yeah.
so hence why I asked
Yeah.
if you teach
Yeah.
music.
So, funnily enough, we kind of have almost like a small band in our room right now
There we go.
because Doug plays the drums,
There we go.
you're a guitarist, singer, and then
Piano.
and I'm not very good at anything. I could play
So you
this.
sing.
I sing a little bit, but not.
Percussion.
Yeah.
We'll put you on percussion.
Tambourine.
No,
Tambourine.
seriously, if Doug
Shaker.
could weigh in right now, he would say I'm not very good at keeping time. So, but that's fun. So I'm always bugging him when we're driving somewhere in the car if I'm trying to clap along or click along to a song, and he's
Yeah.
like, "Are you trying to be off the beat on purpose?"
You just be, you
So-
don't- you're just doing
Gotta own that.
That
you're
would
doing a
bug me.
syncopated rhythm. That's what you're
That's
doing,
right.
actually.
Yeah.
Just throw that back in his face every now and then.
It's jazz. Just go with jazz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not really any explanation for jazz, is there? It's just
Exactly.
it's all over the shop. Yeah. So, Tell us about if you guys had like a bit of a dream for your wedding growing up, like separately from each other. Like, I know that me as a little girl, I dreamed of a certain wedding, and I think we talked about my dream wedding being on a boat and all sorts of things like that. But tell us about your dream wedding growing up, if you had one, and then how your wedding differed from that.
I think, yeah, I'd never really had like a dream wedding in mind. There were certain pieces that I knew that I really wanted. So I knew I always wanted like a big fluffy dress. That was one of my big criteria.
Yeah.
I always wanted that big dress, which I did, spoiler alert, I did get.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But I think for me, what I really wanted from the day was to have my friends and family together. There aren't that many points in your life where you can have everyone that you love and want to have around. So that was one of the criteria for me, that I wanted, that, you know, that's something that was really important, which obviously proved rather challenging with what COVID threw towards us. But yeah, so for me, it was more about, I suppose, the feeling of the day. I also really just wanted the day to be a lot of fun. I'm loud and energetic, so I really wanted that to sort of be part of the day as well. And I don't know if Jacob ever had a little boy's dream of what his wedding was going to be.
Yeah, little boy's dream, that's right.
Did you?
I think it was more the idea that weddings are serious, and I always thought about the idea of taking it seriously.
Yeah.
So wearing a proper suit, all the trimmings, doing it right, having it in the right location with the right person, making sure that everything's done correctly.
Yeah.
And of course, a party and fun and love is all part of it,
Yeah.
but there's also it's serious
The
business.
traditional
Yeah.
side, like
And so
quite
that was
traditional.
that was very important to me
Yeah.
to get it right. So
Yeah.
I think I said it was one of the first things that we said. Well, I said definitely.
Yeah.
When we started talking about what kind of wedding we were like, is I want to wear a tuxedo.
Yeah.
This is non-negotiable. I'm wearing a tuxedo. I'm going to look like Daniel Craig out of James Bond.
You're
That's
not the
it.
first groom that I've
Yeah.
heard have that request.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
I'll wear a suit to work. So
Yeah.
wearing
When
a suit
do you
is
get
not
to wear
is not
a
fancy.
tuxedo? Like,
Yeah.
how often
That's right.
do you get to wear? Bit of a kind of random question here, but like I guess it kind of relates to, you know, you as a couple. Like when you're planning a wedding, especially during COVID, it can be quite stressful. So what did you guys do that was sort of kept things fun? Was there any little dates that you did just to make sure you weren't getting too you know, stressed or focused on the fact that there was just constantly changing restrictions and things like that?
I think one of the biggest decisions that we made really early on, so when we got engaged, March 2020, it was right at the beginning of this thing that we knew of
The
COVID.
world shutting down.
Yeah. So the week we got engaged, that Sunday night was the press conference where all restaurants, all cafes were shutting. So that was the week we got engaged. So pretty early on, we were like, okay, not sure what it's going to look like, but let's push it out 18, almost 2 years. I'm sure we'll be right. Famous last words. Last words. But one of the things we actually decided early on is that we weren't going to do a COVID backup plan until we were a month out from our wedding, because things were just changing so quickly. And we had watched some dear friends of ours go through the process during 2020, and the wedding was on again, off again, on again, off again. And it was really stressful, and it was really hard for them because they were dealing with that change, and they kept evolving the plan, and then they could reverse it back because restrictions were lifting, but then they came back in again. So we just made a call fairly early on that we would stress about that when we were really close to it, and when we could actually have a little bit of foresight and go, all right, today things are this, let's adapt it to this. And we sort of, because our wedding was 8th of January, so it was sort of early in the new year, we had a little bit of extra time to be able to lock certain things in with our venues, because obviously a lot of venues over Christmas and New Year do have a slight shutdown period for the venues that we had. So we had, like, for example, we didn't have to lock our numbers in until the week of our wedding, which at the time when we were booking, we were like, oh, that seems really late. But now that, especially what we were then handed, it was great, because the week before our wedding, obviously, COVID was coming in like a new storm. So, that was probably one of the biggest things that sort of stopped us from getting too stressed, was just we weren't trying to think about what the backup plan and what the backup to the backup was, because that was just going to be, who knew what we were going to be handed if we tried to do that back in March.
Oh, definitely. It was just, you can't, I guess no one could pre-plan anything if it was a few months out. So, I always say to a lot of my couples, just wait until, the month lead up and then, but I always recommend having that conversation early of, if this scenario happens, what are we going to do? What are our kind of, where do we draw the line kind of thing?
Yeah,
So,
and one of the things we did do, so when we first got engaged, we actually had 2 other venues booked for our ceremony and reception. So, and throughout, so when we first got engaged, weddings were off. So venues, there was no density. There was none of this 1 per 2, 1 per 4, stand-up consumption, sitting down. There was none of that. It was just weddings were off. So all venues, they weren't even thinking about how big their venues were. They were talking about the license that they had before. So in their minds, it was, well, when weddings are back on, we'll be able to do them at the capacity that we had. So about August of 2020, when weddings were coming back in, we had to sort of change both of our venues because we actually became our ceremony space was too small for what we were going to have, because we were going to have just over 100. And unfortunately, our reception venue was going to be closed due to some construction works. So in August of 2020, we had to rebook both of everything. But what it allowed us to do at that point in time, and this was another key decision that we made, is when we were rebooking, we decided we were going to deliberately book bigger venues, because who knew what we were going to be dealt with. And it actually ended up working in our favour, because our venues were 4 times the size that they needed to be. And
very smart.
look,
it worked out. Yeah, we were proved right.
Yeah, we were proved right. Look, I think our families thought we were a little bit crazy sort of booking the venues that we did just because of the size. So, the conservatory at Ayers House, we are perfectly sized, and they have the ability to sort of make it feel a bit smaller. But our reception we then did at the town hall in the auditorium there, which was absolutely stunning. But it is huge. It's, normal capacity of about 400 people. So when we were booking, and we sort of in the back of our mind were like, well, worst case, if it's 1 per 4, we'll still fit. And thanks to Boxing Day restriction changes, we didn't get hit with density in the end.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So how did COVID affect your wedding?
So for us, it was the Boxing Day restriction announcements which threw the spanner into the works for us. So obviously we all lived it, but so density went down to 1 in 4.
1 per
4 square meters. Dancing was banned for all guests except for the bridal party. No stand-up consumption of food or beverage. Because as we know, COVID rises. And what else was there? Oh, and I think one of the biggest COVID probably the impacts was obviously a lot of people were getting – the close contact thing really became prevalent. There were a lot of our guests that then were getting pinged as being in close contact, and that point – we had different definitions of close contact floating around, and then there was
the quarantine rules were different in SA to other states.
And then there was the announcement that we're going to, this is the definition of close contact that was going to be accepted nationally, and then no, we're not accepting it. Oh wait, no, we are. But I think it was a great time. But I think also, what else did COVID impact? I'm trying to just remember.
It was really that one. It was the guests that were coming. The rules kept changing, and who could come and who couldn't come, and the reasons why they could or could not come all changed. And I think leading up to it as well, we became essentially hermits in our own home, because we couldn't risk going anywhere, getting pinged as a contact and have to quarantine and get locked out of our own wedding. Like it just couldn't happen. And
we were we have some very lovely family and friends, but our bridal party and our really close friends and family decided to do the same. So basically from Boxing Day onwards, which was about 14 days out, they all really sort of like shut down, and sort of they were seeing each other, because obviously we'd all, spent Christmas together, but, we sort of we had New Year's at home with us 2 and our 2 dogs. Mm-hmm. Great New Year's. But it forced a lot of them to really think about it. And luckily a lot of people weren't at work at that particular time. But it sort of, that was probably the most challenging thing, was the ever-changing close contact or COVID quarantine requirements at that time.
How many guests dropped off your list?
So we probably ended up losing close to 20 all up. But some of them then on the day of our wedding were able to come because their they actually got cleared by SA Health that their quarantine actually was meant to end 2 days earlier. And but yeah, so we lost a fair chunk, but we actually managed from our wedding. No one got COVID from the actual day, which was amazing because we had close to 100 people, of our closest friends and family, and not to occur was. Oh, look, we were amazed, especially considering like that weekend in Adelaide, it was like a COVID superstorm. If you remember, the numbers were huge. I think every second person you knew was either a close contact or had COVID. And yeah, it was.
Can't believe that happened to you guys like that.
I know. And it was sort of a little bit disheartening because right before Christmas, weddings were almost there. We were almost back to normal at Christmas time for weddings. Like had it been prior to Christmas, there was no real impact for us. But Boxing Day, yeah, definitely changed things. And we lost our MC 48 hours out. She got COVID and she was actually one of our dear friends as well. So she missed the wedding, which was, that's the sort of thing that it sort of affected us, is that some people just ended up not being able to come. A few of our families got pinged as well.
Friends of ours that were getting married the following week.
Yep.
And decided not to come because they couldn't risk getting pinged at the wedding and then being locked out of their wedding.
Yeah.
And then, we had some guests who have vulnerable family members, and at that time, being in a crowd of that size was just too high a risk, so it sort of hit us on all sorts of fronts.
Yeah. It sounds like you guys were really like level-headed about it though too. Like even though it is sad that you couldn't have some people at your wedding, it sounds like you guys were so understanding and lovely about it, which is so good. Yeah.
Yeah. I think No, you go.
I think the main thing was the venues. We didn't have to search for other venues.
Yeah.
When those restrictions came in on Boxing Day, we looked at each other and went, no, we planned for this.
Yeah.
This is exactly what we thought was going to happen. It has now happened. We're good.
Yeah.
And so it was about dealing with the frills, which was some people not being able to make it, and the no dancing thing.
Yeah.
And that was something we sort of worked out early on for us. And this is different for every couple. We sort of worked out the absolute mandatories, and then we worked out the things that we were calling frills. And for us, while we're, our friends and family, and we love a good dance, for us, we were like, that wasn't going to be a be all and end all for us. If that got lost, yes, upsetting, and we would love for it not to have been, but it wasn't going to stop us moving forward. And we had a few other things on that list, but we'd had that conversation, and we just tried to stay as calm as possible because the situation around us was so chaotic. If we had, I suppose, gone into a sense of chaos ourselves, we wouldn't have gotten anywhere.
Yeah. So what were the most important things for you guys to hold on to when you knew Boxing Day that it was like happening?
I think for us, the ability to get married was overarching the most important thing for us. That was always our be all and end all, is that we were going to get married that day, come hell or high water.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Just,
No.
yeah, it makes me like a little bit teary.
If it ended up getting to the point that the whole reception had to be cut, that would be okay, so long as the ceremony could still go ahead.
Aww.
That was it. That was the non-negotiable bit.
So good. You can just tell how in love you two are. It's so beautiful. So guys, tell us about the best part of your day.
Oh, it goes so quickly, but yet it goes forever when you start at 5 a.m. in the morning. What was it, 10 a.m.?
10:30. Yeah, more like 10:30.
But I think we've spoken about this a fair bit, but the best part of our day was the ceremony. We really loved the whole, yes, it only goes for 30 minutes. Yes, it's only a very small part of the day, but for us, it was a really lovely moment to have all of our friends and family all paying attention to what we were saying about each other, what our celebrant was saying. What my brother did a very lovely reading for it as well. And the atmosphere in the space at the time, I don't think we're ever going to be able to recreate that. It was such a warm, positive vibe. And even like when we said our vows and, we finally said I do, the positive energy that was created during the ceremony and absolute roar that came with the saying our vows and saying I do to each other, finally after 10.5 years, the clapping from our friends and family just kept going. And I think we both just stood there looking at each other like beaming like absolute,
Getting an encore.
school. getting an encore to our own wedding. But
Do it again.
It was really, really lovely. And yeah, if I could just I think I will just watch that moment over and over again because like that feeling was amazing. I think you would agree.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm just stoked that I managed to get through the vows. I was guaranteed. I told our celebrant, it's like it needs to be super short. I'm not going to say very much because if I say more than a couple of sentences, I won't be able to get through the whole thing. So
did you guys write your own?
Yeah, we wrote our own. Mine was efficient. I'll use efficient, succinct, short and sweet. But yeah, managed to get through it.
Were you just super nervous? Like, was it the nerves?
Oh, it's just the emotion of it. It's just like I struggled to sort of get through in those sorts of situations. So yeah, all worked out.
So lovely.
Yeah, I was doing the classic, just keep smiling, and I can't cry. So that's what I just kept saying to myself: just keep smiling, and you can't cry if you're smiling. It worked about 95% of the time. Yeah, no,
it does take over the emotion. That's like a very emotional part of the day.
Yeah, and I think also again, like it's that one moment in your life where you've shared with someone, you've shared with your celebrant your story, and you've shared with them like who we are as people and who we are as a couple and why we wanted to get married. And I think it's also in that moment you're hearing someone explain your life to you and how you feel, and you sort of go, yeah, that is why we're doing this, and this is why we're being together. And it was, again, really lovely for our friends and family to hear that about us as well.
That's the funny thing as well, isn't it? Because everyone in that room knows the story.
Yeah.
They know why. And yet for some reason, having it kind of summarised and narrated in that way is really lovely.
Yeah.
So how did planning your wedding through a pandemic sort of help you weigh in on decisions?
Neither of us have been married before, so it's not like we could compare it to planning a wedding in non-COVID times. But it just, I think planning just, you had to think outside the square. You had to think of all the impossible things that might happen. You had to think about things, well, what if my suppliers got COVID? What if my guests got COVID? So you start, and this is sort of at the beginning, you start thinking, what if this person, what if that person? And that's when we sort of very early on said, we can't catastrophize right now. We just have to wait till we're a bit closer, and then we can really sort of go into that moment. But I think one thing that was really obvious is that people became really understanding during COVID. Obviously, when the wedding industry first got hit with it back in 2020, there was so much money that was lost. There was so much inflexibility from old ways that you would do contracts and things like that. It would just be if you had to change the date, you lost money. That's it. But what was really nice to see, and yes, it caused a lot of stress for a lot of people, was people were really open to, all right, let's change the date. Let's not cancel. Let's change the date and let's work with you. And it was great to see all the suppliers. And so when we were planning, it was just about having some really honest conversations with everyone and going, what is your COVID policy? If worst case we have to cancel, what's your rules? What can we work with? So I think that was one of the biggest things that I noticed planning, and we certainly had spoken about as well.
Well, I think it's that thing that you said before about the figuring out very early on what are the absolute necessities, mandatories, non-negotiables, and what are the frills. And being okay if the frills are mucked around with, so long as the mandatory things are maintained. And being honest about that, I think, as well, because it's very easy to say, oh, but this is the way I want the day to go, and all of it isn't necessary. It's like, well, not all of it's necessary. So which bits were the really important bits? And for us, that was definitely the ceremony. But being okay with some flexibility is also important.
Being realistic,
Yeah.
You do. I think that was the one thing that COVID just kept telling us and showing us, is that you just had to be a little bit realistic about everything. Even when it came down to the guests, like, we had family from overseas that just couldn't come. And while we would love for them to have been there, it just was not practical. Our borders had only just opened by that point, and they'd only been given, I think it was a month's notice before January that our borders were even going to be open. So, for us to ask family, I'll just book a ticket, she'll be right, mate. Well, it just wasn't possible.
Yeah.
So, and I think that was the other element, is our guests were really understanding. I think had we had to uninvite people because of density restrictions. I don't imagine that any of our guests would have unfriended us at that point in time or been completely unreasonable. I think everyone became a lot more understanding because it had also, by our wedding date, he'd been around for 2 years. Like, we'd all seen what it had done and decimated in so many different ways. But the actual planning itself was, we knew no different.
Yeah. Didn't change anything.
Didn't really change anything. The only thing from a wedding perspective, it was our engagement party that we did actually push back. We couldn't do that until January of 2021, just because with COVID in 2020, just events weren't happening. So that was really, from a planning perspective, that was the only thing that probably changed along the timeline a little bit.
So what piece of advice I might get each of you to answer this because you might both have different pieces of advice. What piece of advice would you give to another couple about wedding planning?
I think that one of the first ones is that people are okay with it. I think especially at this moment, and we certainly experienced it, we didn't have to be in the position where we had to uninvite people from our wedding. But people are okay with it. People understand. And if it means that you have to make changes, you have to postpone things, it means that people aren't able to make it. Or, even at our reception, people had to sit down and wear a mask all the time and not dance and don't be silly about it. And you can have a beer when you're sitting down but not standing up. But people are just okay with it because they understand these are the rules and we have to do those things so that this can happen. I think just people are wonderfully accepting of these sorts of things because everyone has experienced
everyone's been touched by it somehow.
Chaos as a result of this. So just be okay with the idea of talking to people about it because people understand. Go from there.
And I think from my perspective, I think one piece of advice is just ask the question. And that came up in so many ways. It might be just ask the question about what the COVID policy was, but also just ask the question if you're wanting to do something a little bit different because you have to, just ask. I think, when we both first started planning, we had some really honest conversations about what we wanted, and what we would like the day to look like. And when we first came up to it, I was like, it doesn't really sound like we're going to be able to do that in the spaces that we had then booked. But once we just started asking questions, people were absolutely okay with it. And I think, we're sort of we get told that wedding planning is stressful and that you shouldn't overcomplicate things. And I'm certainly not saying, I'm not an advocate for complicating things, but if you've got something that you really want to do, ask the question because people want to do something a bit different and they want to do something a bit unique. If there's something that's in the back of your mind that you saw or you want them to do or give it a go, ask. And I think it's just,
good advice. I think because a lot of people think, I can't do that because it's my wedding or it's not traditional. But you guys really took that and ran with it, doing something unique. Thanks for taking us through everything about your wedding day. It's been so awesome. And I'm sure it's going to be really helpful to other couples listening, not just couples if, not even just COVID affected, but you talked about a lot of things that are relevant when COVID is no longer a thing.
Thanks for listening to the Wedding Edit.
That